It's gone black, it's thinking.
Yep.
Yes.
We can see that now. Fantastic.
Okay. So we're not too sure what went on. So if it happens again, we'll keep trying to get back on again.
Excellent. Well, we'll let you know if we're not seeing or hearing you, but I'll hand over to you to get started.
Thanks, Lisa, and apologies everyone for the technological gods were not with us, but now they are, so we'll jump straight in.
So I'm Megan, and it's Megan and Penny here. We thought we'd start it by telling you a little bit about ourselves very quickly because we've lost so much time. We both founded M&P Partners in 2014, and really we came together because of this case study. So we're very, very passionate about the case study, and we thought it was a really good one to talk to you about because it's why we formed our business. What we are about is helping people to connect with the work they do, make the work that they do matter. And as you can see, it's a fusion of HR, marketing and communications that we bring to the table. My background is in HR, strategic HR for 20 odd years. And Penny, you?
I have a background in strategic communications, both external and internal. So brand, advertising, corporate affairs is my background. But today we're here to talk with you about narratives. Not so much storytelling from a personal point of view, which certainly has a place in organisations and is very powerful, but how as a communicator do you build that organisational narrative? What's the story for your organisation that captures the hearts and minds and gets people to change behaviour in the direction that you want them to move? Just a little bit of background around why stories work. Since caveman times, there's certainly been, and cavewoman times, there's certainly been evidence that stories work. It was how information was passed from one generation to the next. But now we've got science to back us up as to why stories work. And you might be familiar with Paul Zak, the neuroeconomist, who did some fascinating research of people's brains as they were watching movies and listening and hearing stories. It actually releases that what's colloquially called the trust hormone, that feel-good hormone of oxytocin. And people trust you, want to be like you, or want to learn more about you when you share a personal story or share a story which resonates with you. There's also been some good work done by Christine Comerford and others who are in behavioural economics around the fact that whilst we think we're quite rational beings, we're actually driven by our emotions. And just a sort of ironical last point there around the fact that we know within organisations having a PowerPoint pack, even though that's what we're doing with you today, doesn't really change behaviour. It's the stories that we tell and the empathy you create with the characters. Again, we're probably telling you information you already know, but we always love sharing, you know, who we like listening to and who we admire and look up to. You're probably familiar with Branson and his storytelling approach within his organisation. I think he calls it the fireside chat, fireside way of working, that not only is about storytelling, to build empathy and understanding within his organisation, but he actually uses it as a way to generate new ideas and to innovate. It's a very powerful use of storytelling. Sheryl Sandberg, who's one of my pin-up people, certainly her personal story that she told around how women can achieve and be admired and have more of an impact, particularly through her book Lean In, really came not through the data and the information she had around how women can have an impact, but when she started to tell personal stories, then that's where it had real cut through. And you probably heard of this, the old guy on the left there, he's got 50 years, he's dead now. Is anyone familiar with Kurt? But if you've got a moment, pop that URL into your search engine, because there's a beautiful old video of him talking about the shapes of stories, and there's some universal ways that you craft a story, and even though that's an old piece of footage, I think it's still a fantastic piece of information around how you shape a story. Anyway, enough of the best practice, if you like, and we'll get straight into the heart of this particular case study. But I love this quote. Within organisations, as opposed to the ad world, we're not looking for slogans that might capture attention for a moment. We're looking for that really heartfelt and narrative that's connected to the strategy of the organisation if we're really trying to move people within an organisation. So I might throw to Megan now to talk through what was the business problem within the blood service. That's always our starting point, is what is the business need we're meeting.
And to Penny's previous point, it's because it's not a flash in the pan or a campaign. It is very much the strategic narrative that we're telling. Understanding the business problem is really, really critical. Let me tell you a bit about the blood service very quickly for those that don't know. The Australian Red Cross Blood Service is in a fairly unique position globally because it's the only provider of blood products in Australia. It is fully government funded and it is a not-for-profit. There is no cash that is exchanged. So donors are not paid for their blood, nor does the organisation charge hospitals and recipients for the products that they distribute. It is about I don't know what it is now, but when I was there, it was about a $20 million business. And as I said before, I was the client and Penny came in to help us to address this business problem. We had a new CEO who was driving a very quick change program that was not classed as a change program, but it was about restructuring and refocusing the organisation to be much more efficient and effective in what they did. So that her clear strategy and plan was about changing the way everybody did what they did and how we delivered the products to our recipients. But our employees didn't understand the strategy, so they weren't engaged with it. The essence of the improvement was about repositioning the business as opposed to being a not-for-profit. Introducing lean manufacturing principles, talking about the recipients as customers and the donors, and restructuring the organisation behind much more efficient processes. Because it was a not-for-profit, the people who were usually or traditionally attracted to it were people who like working in a not-for-profit. And we had a lot of them, 4,000 staff. A lot of them came from not-for-profits. We needed to introduce different talent that came from corporates so they could bring a different mindset and also bring in less qualified people. The 75% of the workforce actually had one degree qualification and more. So it was a highly qualified workforce. We needed to actually reduce the level of talent that was coming in as well. And lastly, the organisation was roughly split 50-50, people in donor-facing roles, so those that took the blood and marketed to those that were donating blood, and then those that actually were doing a lot of the research, the scientific research, the medical staff, etc. And then you had your corporate functions. So it was really 50-50 split with that. So this is a diagram, or this is really our model of operating as M&P, and it's really useful to look at because if you look at the bottom axis, the people management systems and processes, that's typically where organisations focus when they are introducing change. So very much from an HR perspective, that's where HR works. So it's about the how and the what. We look at what do we need to change and how are we going to do it. Whereas marketing and comms people tend to look at the other axis, the attitudes and behaviours around, you know, why would people engage with what we're doing, the change? And as you can see in this diagram, if you're trying to achieve a goal, if you don't focus on both, then you actually miss achieving that goal, you know, in the time that you need to achieve it. So, to summarise what the challenge was, it was about trying to excavate what was going to be the unifying narrative for the organisation. As you can see, the left-hand circle, we had those employees in donor-facing roles, the right-hand circle, those other employees, but there's something that overlapped with them. It was like two organisations, and I kept saying there is something that brings us together that we need to be able to articulate to be able to engage people and make it real. And it was about that, increasing the commercial focus, but what was the thing that we needed to draw out that bonded the two. So that's where Penny came in. The project actually started as an EVP project. EVP means Employee Value Proposition. So Penny, I might hand over to you to talk a bit more about EVP?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you've got a question around EVP or whether it's a concept already familiar to you, but it's, in short, it's what makes your organisation a great place to work. Why would you want to work at your organisation? Why would you want to work at the Blood Service? And equally, for people already working at the Blood Service, why you would continue to work there, want to work there, want to put in the extra effort and advocate for others to join. So it's a really important narrative to bond people to the organisation and to give meaning and purpose to the work that they do. So in the HR sphere, it's called EVP, but in the comms sphere, I really think of it as the story we tell about why we're a great place to work. So the project started as that. And before we jump in to show you the actual narrative, which we'll then dissect, we want to talk to you about the approach, because drafting the narrative is not an exercise where a beautiful writer sits in a room and drafts the story. It really starts way back at the research stage, and we call it a mix of art, science and design to what we do. The first piece is around deep dive research into existing and new work that we can do to understand those underlying attitudes and behaviours. So within the Blood Service, as Megan will attest, there was focus groups. We used a drawing activity to people to tap into that emotional connect. We looked at the existing engagement survey data that was in the organisation to look at where the pressure points were. We built from that. We did telephone interviews with some of the people who perhaps didn't want to speak directly about their current experience, but we needed to delve more deeply into what was holding them back. There were executive interviews done, and so we got that leadership top-down view as well as the bottom-up view from the employees in the organisation at all levels. And then we also looked at the way the brand was represented externally, because if your external brand story doesn't match with the story within the organisation, we know that's a pressure point in terms of getting cut through. We also looked at best practice research on what organisations are doing in the space of EVP. And then we moved to that definition and ideation space around, well, how are we going to pull this together? And you'll see creatively how that came about when we show you the animation. And then very, very important to do that testing with key stakeholders before you launch, and to gain that all-important endorsement from the very highest levels within the organisation, so that there's leadership around why this is an important process, and advocacy around why the creative approach would work. And then the implement stage was really around translating that across all different channels within the organisation, from the website to the intranet to the way people positioned it externally via recruiters, also to wall graphics, environmental graphics, so that people could see and feel the EVP, that narrative, come to life in their workplace, which we'll show you further down. But we wanted to take you through that approach first up, so that you can understand that this narrative didn't just come about in one creative session of a writer sitting down. It actually started months before and took time to build. And that's how you get the buy-in, that's how you get the connection, and that's how people can see their own experience in this final creative result. So Lisa, I'm going to share now, hopefully this will work, in terms of pressing.
Cross your fingers, technology co-op.
Well, if it doesn't work, we can certainly send a link to everybody to have a look at later.
Here we go. Is that working?
Yes, it is.
We're entrusted with the supply of Australia's blood. We collect, process, and distribute life-saving blood products. We also contribute expertise, leadership in diagnostic, transplantation, and other clinical services, and world-class research. With this privilege, comes responsibility. To deliver safe products in time to meet demand from our customers, hospitals, pathology labs and healthcare providers, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our work impacts lives, and we are incredibly proud of the part we play. Not everybody gets how we do our work really matters. So our challenge is to always strive to do better and to make every dollar count in a healthcare system with increasing patient demand. By doing our work well, we also honour the vital contribution of Australia's amazing blood donors and hold true to steadfastly deliver one of the world's safest blood supplies. The journey of blood is amazing. From donor collection to our state-of-the-art processing centres, each employee plays a vital part in the journey. 3,800 staff work in professional and close-knit teams. Individually, we can do so much, but together we can achieve so much more. We're in the business of saving lives. Let's be amazing.
So, apologies for any delay and the technological glitches, but did everybody, hopefully everybody saw that? Any? Oh no, the next one's come up, sorry.
Oh no.
Oh no, yes, see, so now we want to talk about that narrative, and hopefully you were able to see the narrative, but Penny, do you want to talk about how that was built?
Sure. So is there anything that you noticed when you were listening or watching, and it was slow, the narrative about the structure? Normally, good communications always starts with the why. So why we exist, what's the purpose of the organisation. But we had to turn that on its head in this instance. And that is because it was important that unifying piece around what we do and the role we play in Australia was going to be the unifying piece for both groups of employees that Megan spoke about earlier. Those involved in the donor-facing roles and those involved in research, manufacturing and scientific and other type roles. So that's why we started with we are the custodians of Australia's blood supply, to give real gravitas and pride in the national and almost monopolistic role that the blood service plays in the health system in Australia, and to sort of really give a sense of privilege, and the flip side of that is a responsibility to that role. So that was the unifying piece. And then the next thing you can see there in terms of the flow of the narrative is to talk about how we do our work and why doing our work really effectively and efficiently was really important, because, and this is where the why comes in, the why was around the role that the blood service plays in the broader national interest of the health system, the why in terms of making, you know, every dollar count, the why in terms of patients and their needs, and then lastly, looking at honouring those contributions of the donors. So every other communication up until that point in the organisation was around donations, and having that last point, number 4, first. And that was our first insight, to flip that, which was counterintuitive at the time, but that was the breakthrough insight. Then if we flick to the next slide, we can show you the architecture of the messaging. I can't seem to see the questions, so please shoot them through or talk over the top of us, Lisa, if there's things people want us to delve into more deeply. The why we exist was well known within the blood service, and that was that great stat around 1 in 3 Australians need blood, yet only 1 in 30 donates. That was well known, so we did not need to really beat the drum on that. What we needed to do was to hone in on what we do, and because there are such diverse roles within the organisation, to have a unifying message around the power of what we do collectively across all those roles, whether it's scientific, research, corporate, IT, etc. Then we wanted to build the case around why we need to be a business, which was the piece Megan was talking about before, in terms of it's not enough just to be in the business. It's not just enough to be saving lives. The more commercially we can do that, the more cost effectively and efficiently we can do that. At the time was a bit of a dirty word to be commercial. So why is that important within an organisation? So that's why we've said here in this why we need to be a business is around the processing of the blood, honouring the donors, making every dollar count in the healthcare system, and driving home that it's not just about the siloed way of thinking within the organisation, not even on an individual level. Our work will be amazing when we do work together more effectively. And that's where the slogan, if you like, popped out at the end of we're in the business of saving lives. And then that flowed into the EVP, or the value proposition for having a career, a really strong career at the blood service. And that was around the three things of professionalism, meaning and challenge. And the next slide there that we're showing is really how we further developed that messaging. And Megan, actually, you might want to talk to this because you really integrated this across the employee life cycle within the business. So yeah. I'll throw to you there.
Thanks, Penny. Really for us, the essence of the value proposition was that word business. So we're in the business of saving lives. You'll notice in that video, hopefully the sound was okay. The business was a dirty word effectively. So we brought it front and centre in that EVP because people needed to understand that that was the strategy. So that we're in the business of saving lives is still resonating today in the blood service. It's still the line that they're using, that we're in the business of saving lives. But the new emphasis in being a business meant that the three pillars that underpinned our EVP were professionalism, meaning and challenge. And it's about how the employee experiences those in the workplace. We were trying to articulate that in what we were presenting externally to potential employees, but also highlighting for current employees. The key difference there was around challenge. Because it was a challenging environment, we were introducing so much change, and it was complex change, and we were retrenching up to about 400 people through the whole 2 to 3 year period. So it was a very challenging environment. We wanted people to know that when they came in, because that actually is something that the people we wanted actually would be attracted to. Come and you know, bring your skill set from a bank or an accounting firm or wherever, and use what you've done there, but come to a place that has meaning, that you can feel proud of the work you're doing because it has meaning. And that we were a very professional workplace. As I said before, over 75% had at least one qualification. So you're working in an environment where there are very professional people who have you know, high intellect, essentially. So that was the pillars of the EVP. So impact, Penny?
The impact really began at the start of the process. I don't know if you remember, we spoke about the time and effort we took in the research phase, and that really was the starting point of the story development and the power of the story, way back before the animation was even created. And one person I remember described it was a really cathartic process. And I think that's really telling, that you've got to bring to bear some of the, understand what's holding people back and what some of their issues are before you can describe the aspirational part of where we're heading as an organisation. And then we had it sort of flowed down into personal storytelling that we then asked employees to be involved in. So that's why that comment, loved being chosen to express how I feel, came about. And then when we actually did launch the video, people described it as having goosebumps, and I think I wasn't there at the executive when it was launched there, but it was quite an emotional response, wasn't it?
Yeah, when we presented it to the executive and then subsequently the board, there was claps and tears. So it really demonstrated to us that we had totally nailed it, because people were emotionally reacting to what we were showing. So that was really, really rewarding. Aside from those intrinsic rewards, we actually were able to measure the success of it externally. We had the engagement survey results improved. The strategy, people could actually talk to the strategy. People could talk to the strategy and use that as the basis for telling the story about why we needed to restructure certain divisions or certain teams. So that was really important. Obviously with recruitment, it just basically made it so much easier for our recruiters. We had a huge recruitment load. The agencies and the internal recruitment team were able to very easily talk about us as an organisation. Just as an aside, one of the things at the very early outset the exec director had asked with this project was the barbecue conversation. When people turn to you and say, what do you do and where do you work? A lot of people would say, I work at the blood service, and the response was, well, you're not a nurse or you're not a doctor. What do you do there and why would you work there? And so it was for them to be able to say in a very easy way what it is they do and why they work there. And so people then were able to use that. We're in the business of saving lives in those barbecue settings. Also on the website, there's a pre and post implementation, as you can see, uplift in the careers pages and other pages that people came through. And our LinkedIn follower base grew significantly over that period. And finally, in terms of impact, the client feedback. So the executive director, I'll let you read that at another stage, but the three things that I want to highlight is that one of the most powerful things from her perspective was that people were able to hear this narrative and make a decision that this wasn't the organisation they wanted to be with anymore. And that was really important because they didn't want to work in a business. They were very much the not-for-profit mindset, and they didn't like the fact that the organisation was becoming a business. And because they understood what was going on, they actually self-selected and left the organisation, and that was a real win. The other thing to note there is about the EVP. You just can't roll it out and forget it. As with any change program, you need to continually refresh it, look at how it's embedded. And so we'll show you some guidelines around how it can be embedded further in the whole employee journey. But there is a new CEO now at the blood service. It has been refreshed, but that we're in the business of saving lives, and that narrative, what we showed you, is still there and being used as their EVP. So these are some examples of other uses. Would you want to talk to Penny?
Yeah, sure. So this is what the website used to look like. And we always have a little in-joke here at M&P where there's so many organisations that talk about if you join them, you can make a difference. And if we had $1 for every time someone said we make a difference, we'd be very rich women. It's a very hackneyed phrase. So by building the Let's Be Amazing story, we're in the business of saving lives, we really brought that unique voice to the blood service about what it meant to work there. We did restructure the careers section of the website, which is on the left, and also the messaging obviously flowed through to connect their intranet, their employee intranet site. Again, that's always being updated and refreshed. So this was what it looked like for a year or so after launch. As I mentioned before, there are also environmental graphics of the story. It was such a powerful story that people wanted to see it on the walls and to be reminded of it on a daily basis, and that not ever forgetting that physical setting has such an impact on what it feels like to work at an organisation. And the Let's Be Amazing really was the rallying cry. It was also translated across other collateral in the employee journey, policies, performance and development. Again, it had that induction, and you can see we actually use this, what we call the Lifeline, which is that line across the page with the arrow as one of the visual devices to bring gravity to the comms. And you can see the Lifeline there too. This is a job ad. Each donor appointment, iBook means 3 lives saved. So again, drawing that line of sight between your personal contribution and your role, whatever role it is in the blood service, with that broader narrative of being in the business of saving lives. We won't show you those, but you can see some of the storytelling that flowed down on a personal level within the organisation. Once we had this organisational narrative, this story for the whole of the blood service, then people told their personal stories about what it meant to work there and why their work had impact. And some of the challenges that they were facing, and why they were prepared to go the extra mile, because they knew it would have a big impact on someone's personal life. So we have made up a bit of time in terms of, sorry for starting late, but we'd be happy to talk through any questions. I'm trying to look at some of the questions now.
If you send the questions, then Lisa, you're, I think, going to send them to us so that we can answer them.
Yeah, so there's a few questions there in the chat section that you might be able to see, Penny and Megan. If not, I'm happy to read them out to you.
Oh, please read them out.
Okay, sure. So first of all, sorry, I'm just scrolling up a little bit. So did you meet with much internal resistance? And if so, how did you address it?
Yes, look, that's a great question. Thank you. We met with a lot of internal resistance through the whole research phase, because it actually is one of the hardest projects I've ever led, because it is was challenging marketing and internal comms. So from an HR perspective, they didn't think we understood EVP. We didn't think they understood EVP, and so we met with lots of challenges through that. And in fact, in bringing Penny into the organisation, that actually helped us to really overcome those issues and take it up a level, where we moved it to that strategic narrative rather than talking just about EVP. So that's a really good question, whoever asked that. Aside from that, it's budget, always budget. And from an HR perspective, we don't have lots of budget usually. Marketing has all the budget, so you don't have the control about the spend. So in building the support at the board and the executive level, that helped us to get budget to be able to then do all the collateral, have the wall graphics, spend the money on updating and actually getting a careers page, because we weren't even allowed to have a careers page that was on the main navigation initially. So things like that were challenging, but we were able to overcome that. Any others?
Yes. So it sounds like a very big project. Can you tell us about the biggest challenge in getting to the end result?
Yes, Penny?
I think being the consultant coming in, what was interesting is that there had been some work done with advertising agencies up until that point to try and to build this story. But their perspective often came from the campaign side of things. So how do you attract new people to join a business or to take more pride in the business? Was sort of quite tactical, some of the solutions. And it wasn't until we said, okay, we need to understand the brand story, we need to understand really what's holding people back, and getting some of those insights and doing the research really thoroughly before we got to, well, what are we really trying to say? So again, that strategic narrative approach rather than a campaign-led approach, I think was one of the biggest challenges, to try and describe why that was. For people who haven't experienced it, it's conceptual, and it's not until you go through that. Megan, you probably attest to that.
Yeah, and so all I was going to say, Penny, is that, we were talking EVP until Penny came in and she elevated the conversation to talk about the narrative. So the storytelling piece was, our marketing team didn't understand that, the comms team didn't understand that, and so the external advertising agency was going down a campaign route, but by bringing them all back and saying it is about the why firstly and the strategic narrative, that made a huge difference. Any other questions?
Yes. In terms of the site itself and the increase in traffic, do you have any insights into why that happened? For example, was it that you were proactively driving people to there, or were they wanting to go there feeling this pride in the organisation and being more proactive in talking about the organisation, or was it a combination of things?
I think it was a combination of things. Yes, people were able to actually talk about it for the first time. So just word of mouth with our own staff, being able to direct people to it. Previously, most of our traffic came via the Red Cross, which is the care organisation, which has nothing to do with the blood service. So traffic now came direct to ours as opposed to through the Red Cross. So that was a big change because people actually could see the brand emerging as from a point of view of a prospective employer.
But people were unprompted sharing the YouTube, the narrative, the animation on YouTube. And I think having that advocacy, you can't sort of, that comes from within. Like, people did it unprompted because they connected with it. It was that emotional connection that drove them to do that. And also by using LinkedIn, there was content that meant something to the employees, and so they were quite confident and quite happy to share, was really what it came down to.
Excellent. Okay, good measurement one coming up next. So you mentioned that there was an increase in the employee opinion survey. How long did the campaign run, and how were you able to directly correlate the increase with the campaign?
That's a good question. I think it's very hard to correlate it specifically because there's, the increase in the engagement comes from everything that was going on. But there are 3 key questions that we continued to ask in the engagement survey. So we were able to track the movement of the responses, and they were 3 EVP questions. And don't ask me what they were because I can't remember. I have subsequently left, but I know that engagement continued to lift on those 3 questions beyond the first 12 months. So, at least 2-3 years in, that was happening.
Metrics is a really hard but important issue in communications. And I think when you start to have integrated thinking across marketing, communications and HR around what you're trying to achieve, then any metric is usually a combination of lots of factors to get you there. But once you start having those integrated conversations across the disciplines, then you can, when a movement happens, and 14% is a big lift in the engagement survey. You know what's contributing to that within the organisation because you know what's happening in comms, internal comms, you know what's happening in the broader business. And you can hand on heart because you've got that trust across the different departments to say, yeah, we know this is really about getting that story right. There's metrics around uplift on views on the careers page and certainly followers on LinkedIn. And I think hand on heart, you'd have to say across the different areas, and it would have been Anne, the executive's position, that without the story, we wouldn't have had that uplift. Yeah. It's probably whilst it's hard to draw a hard line quantitative gain, there weren't 2 other many contributing factors to say that that's the reason why.
And one of the other things was that through all of those retrenchments, we didn't have any industrial action as a result. And again, the executive director attributes that to us having that story and it being understood. But measurement, as Penny said, is a really interesting one.
Yeah, thank you. We
have
got 3 more questions in just 5 minutes, so I'll quickly go through these with you. The next one, sorry, had you finished on that one, Penny?
I can wax lyrical about measurement, so we can come back to that later if you like.
Okay, so the next one says, this case study was very interesting. I work with a firm that builds strategic narratives for other companies, but sometimes find it difficult to get them to see the importance of a strategic narrative in all aspects of communication. How do you then convince, say, the corporate communications team to change their line of thought to accept this strategic narrative?
That's why we set up our business.
Yeah. You really have to live through it to know it. And I think there was a bit of a leap of faith from Megan in what we were talking about at the time, but it was that some trust was built to take that leap of faith. I guess the other thing we do when working with other organisations, and we've been doing a bit around.
Are you getting feedback?
Yeah,
No.
The other work we do is around purpose and values within organisations, and it's not until you, I guess, get that conversation outside of one area, so outside of corporate affairs, outside of HR, outside of marketing, and say, okay, at an executive level, do we understand what we stand for? What we stand for as an organisation, what our future direction is, and why people want to be a part of delivering on that. And I think when you start having the conversations at that level, then it's very clear if there is a strategic narrative for the organisation or not. Like it's when you ask those simple questions around why do we exist? What's our purpose, and what is each employee's role in contributing to that? If those questions can't be answered in a coherent way, then that's your case for change. Well, if you want people to lift performance, then do they understand how their contribution makes it, has an impact? And so it's only through that questioning and that dialogue that you move to that higher strategic narrative conversation.
Yeah. Okay, a really quick question here. Is there a link between your campaign and increased donors?
Oh, good question.
That was not the purpose of it, and so it wasn't something we set out to measure. In fact, the whole issue around donors was very different. We actually had lots of donors, and we actually did turn donors away. What we needed was different sorts of donors again. Right. So it was about, we actually had to segment where we were sourcing those donors from. So that was a completely different business problem.
Okay.
But it's
all right. Sorry, we've just got one last question and about a minute to go. So were the updated website and LinkedIn the only ways that you shared the new EVP messaging with your prospective employees? And if I can have a 30-second response, because we will then cut out pretty soon after that.
Recruitment agencies, they had a pack to talk to as well, and then on social media, other social media. Excellent.
Okay. And that's all the questions. So I just wanted to, in case the webinar does cut out, I'd wanted to have the time to thank you so much, Megan and Penny, not only for your brilliant presentation, but also for your patience as you were having technical issues. And I want to do a big thank you to our audience who hung in there as well through those technical difficulties. And we managed to cram it all into the 45 minutes that we had left. This presentation was recorded and will be made available to everyone who attended, as well as those who registered and were unable to attend. So we'll be announcing soon the next webinar that will be scheduled for September. But before that, of course, we have our brilliant conference Fusion in Singapore, and we'd love to have as many of you there as possible. It's going to be a brilliant event. We've got a lot of communicators coming and a lot of really brilliant speakers. So thank you so much. Really appreciate everybody's time today.
And thanks,
Lisa. Thanks, everybody.